So I see everyone is here and the audience is here, so we're going to go ahead and get started. So hello and welcome to Smart Dubai's webinar today on city resilience in the face of the COVID-19 pandemic. This webinar is part of the Smart Cities Global Network Initiative at Smart Dubai. My name is Zain Al-Qaisi and I am the Chief Digital Director at Smart Dubai, and I'd like to welcome our guests for today. Representing Australia, we have John Kavanagh, the Deputy Consul General in Dubai and the Trade Commissioner, also in Dubai, part of the Australian Trade and Investment Commission, Austrade. Representing Singapore, we have Tan Chi Hao, the Director of Planning and Prioritization at the Smart Nation and Digital Government Office, part of the Prime Minister's Office in Singapore. And representing Dubai, we have our very own His Excellency Yunus Al Nasser, the Assistant Director General of Smart Dubai, and the CEO of the Dubai Data Establishment. Welcome, gentlemen.
Thank you very much, Zaina. Good to be here. Assalamu alaikum. Welcome, everybody. Thank you.
Great to have you. Thanks, John. So I don't believe that COVID-19 requires any introduction. So I want to go ahead and get started directly with our panelists and our speakers on the conversation of city and nation resilience facing the COVID-19 pandemic. What are the tools, the measures, the technologies, the infrastructure that the nations had in the face of slowing down and hopefully stopping the spread of the virus? I'd like to get started with Australia. After all, John, Australia was one of the first countries to ease the COVID-19 restrictions back in early May after successfully slowing down the spread of the virus. And in fact, even with the spike we saw last month, still, even with that, Australia remains to have a relatively low number of cases per 1 million population compared to other countries, with around 734 cases per 1 million, while we see that number in the thousands and tens of thousands in other nations. So what would you say, John, made Australia prepared to undertake such swift and efficient responses against COVID-19 to slow down the spread and hopefully contain it?
Thank you, Zaina, and good morning to everybody. It's a pleasure to be on this panel, and good morning, Your Excellency, excuse me. So when it comes to the Australian response, Zaina, I think perhaps everyone on this call isn't quite aware of the context. So I might just give a 1 or 2 minutes, just a brief about where we are and what we've seen in Australia. It's not that different, I think, to other countries in the world. So we've got about 19,000 cases at the moment. Unfortunately, we have had 230 deaths, and that's an ongoing situation for us too. We've done about 4 million tests. So amongst in the world, I think we're one of the countries that have had quite a high rate of testing. It's had a very significant economic impact on Australia. Apart from the health crisis that we're seeing, we have also, for the first time in 29 years, had a recession. So Australia was very proud of its record of year on economic growth. I'm 43 years old, and I can barely remember the last time I was in school that Australia went back in terms of economic growth. So it's been a really tough time in Australia. Like other countries, we've had large-scale layoffs. People have lost their jobs, and as a response, the Australian government has handed out the biggest economic bailout in Australia's history, almost 300 billion Australian dollars worth, or just over 200 billion US dollars worth. So I don't want to undersell what the impact of COVID-19 has been on Australia. It has been profound. It is disrupting people's lives. And as a government, we are doing the best we can to ensure that our citizens are able to maintain some semblance of normal life. I think there are 4 things that we did pretty well. There's 4 things that contribute to Australia having, I think, and I would not claim success at this point. We are by nowhere near the end of this pandemic. We've got a long way to go. So what has worked for us so far, I think, is we have very quickly put in place mechanisms at all levels of government. And unlike the UAE or other countries in the region, we have state and federal system, well, I guess in a way similar to the UAE. And we convened a national cabinet where our federal leaders and our state leaders got together and coordinated very early and very quickly. We listened to experts. So that was something that worked very well for Australia. We listened to our national health experts. So when it came to public health advice, when it came to what they were telling us to do, our administration, as it turned out, and it was the right thing to do, we listened to what they were saying. The second thing that we did that I thought worked quite well for us, and it's not really a smart cities thing. In fact, it's the opposite. It's almost an old school technique. We closed the borders. So on March the 20th, we closed our international borders to all non-Australian citizens and residents. And there was a lot of debate about that inside the Australian government, whether this was the right thing to do. We certainly weren't the first country to do it, but we were one of the earlier ones to do it. And then we insisted on quarantine from people coming back from overseas. So at the start, the vast majority of our cases were coming from people from overseas, of course. So we insisted they do 2 weeks inside. So that was the second thing that we did well. The third thing that I think we did well was we capitalised on the strong social contract between Australian citizens and their government. So when we advised that they had to maintain social distancing, that they shouldn't be visiting elderly people, that they should be minimising their movement, we had pretty good compliance in the early days. That is starting to wear thin, and I'll be honest with you and the people on this call, you can only ask people to really stay inside their houses and minimise their contact with loved ones for a certain amount of time. So that's the third thing that we did, and that worked well. The last two things that we did was we very quickly put in place telehealth mechanisms so that people felt confident that they could talk to doctors, they could get the right advice, and they could see people if they felt in any way that they were showing symptoms. And the last thing that I already mentioned is we've had this huge economic bailout, which is the biggest in Australia's history. We are paying businesses to keep employees on the payroll. We are paying people who otherwise would be unemployed to get through this extraordinary period. Now, Australia hasn't done everything right, Zaino, and I'll be the first to confess that. We didn't have the right stocks of PPE to start with. We did not, in retrospect, lock down cruise ships quickly enough. That was a huge source of infection for us in the early stages. And it was this federal state coordination issue. Who owns an international cruise ship that comes in?
And that you're referring to the Diamond Princess, I believe.
That's right. I think it had the something princess. I've forgotten the name, but it was
Diamond Princess cruise ship.
Yes, there we go. And there was a lot of our infections came from that. And the last thing I'd say, Zaina, just as introductory remarks, is the thing that we didn't do very well is obviously we have a very pronounced second wave at the moment that is happening, mainly located in our second city, Melbourne. And I think there are lessons there for countries in the region that haven't yet had their second wave. And we are managing it as best as we can, but it's clear that we could have been a bit faster and perhaps a bit more prescriptive about managing ongoing COVID-19. I think, to be honest with you here, we just got a little bit complacent. Everyone was talking about how well Australia was doing, and we had very low infection rates for a while. And now, unfortunately, we are dealing with the repercussions of a second wave. So as far as introductory remarks, I might leave it there. I'm happy to take questions, of course, and pass to my colleagues.
No, thanks, John. That's quite insightful, and in the way you've structured it around the 4 areas. I am going to circle back a little bit later around round 2 of this battle. I believe that is something definitely we need to talk about, and lessons learned on resilience there. I want to segue from your 4th area around telehealth and the use of technology to Chi Hao in Singapore. Singapore is known as a nation that really deployed tech early on in its fight against COVID-19, and we all saw the Trace Together application that was deployed in Singapore, and then other countries took that as a benchmark and looked at the Bluetooth protocol that was deployed, trying to learn from that. So Chi Hao, can you tell us how Singapore's advanced digital infrastructure that was already probably there before COVID-19 helped the country in fighting the pandemic, fighting the outbreak, and then also preparing a comprehensive and efficient response to it?
Thank you very much, Zaina. Good morning, and very happy to be here. Also pleased to be with my fellow panelists. Apologies in advance if you hear a little bit of hammering. It's, we're all working from home in Singapore, and so there's some construction works next to me. So, well, I think maybe I'll also start by taking a step back and explaining the sort of situation in Singapore. We are what we call a circuit breaker. We started off pretty well. We closed our borders really early on and had lower cases, but then subsequently there was actually quite a surge in cases due to partly imported cases. Many of our resident Singaporeans were coming back from overseas. And we were committed to bring everyone back, and as well as also during the migrant workers, because many of them live in the dormitories, and it's almost like the cruise ship situation. They are self-contained, but once they are in there, sort of the infection spreads fairly quickly, and so we are still experiencing that. I mean, we have a total of over 50,000 cases, but fatalities have been low so far, 27, and I think we are far from over. It's been we're still sort of in the midst of slowly reopening our economy. Just like Australia, our economy has been badly hit. GDP has been down 40%. We have dipped in the reserves, 4 budgets this year, unprecedented in Singapore, at least for this financial year. Over $100 billion just to support businesses, our people. So we're not quite sure how that's going to go. But I think, if I think about how well we have coped so far, things are relatively more stable now. After the partial lockdown, the circuit breaker period, activity is slowly resuming. People are mostly still working from home, but essential services and gatherings in very small controlled groups are happening. So the overall strategy, I think, is really the same as Australia: testing, contact tracing, safe distancing, whether you're wearing masks, things like that. Specifically on sort of technology, I think it's useful for me to explain a bit more. It's not just about Trace Together. I suppose that's one that is in the news. People hear about it, Bluetooth contact tracing apps. But we use technology really for a comprehensive suite of measures. One of it is as quite simple as getting people information. In the midst of all this crisis, people are panicking. People don't quite know. They need authoritative source of information. The government set up a WhatsApp channel. We have more than 1 million subscribers now. And every day there's government news that says, tells you what's going on, number of cases, what's on the measures, which are the hotspots to avoid. I think that's been very successful. We have been distributing masks. So quickly within days, websites that we have developed in-house in order to tell people where to go, where to collect, what's the queue, so you don't have to go when it's too crowded, so on and so forth. And all this can only take place.
Are those, Chihao, things like Mask Go Where and Flu Go Where that we've...
Yeah, that's right. So there's a couple of websites that have done, various different portals and online services, as well as services to give financial assistance to businesses and to people. But sort of on reflection, I think all this has been possible because we have been fortunate. We have been building up strong digital foundations over the last few years with our Smart Nation movement. We have, with us a government technology agency, commonly known as GovTech Singapore, that has built up our own engineering capabilities. We were able to quickly deploy, did not have to wait for vendors, procurements, or tenders, develop apps. And Trace Together was actually an idea that came from the engineers. It was not something that was top down. I mean, we all knew about contact tracing. There's a manual process, but the idea that you can use Bluetooth sort of like radio signals from your phones to detect who's near you, that's quite novel. And that came from engineers. It was something we encouraged. We didn't quite know where it was going to go in about January, February.
Basically. Yeah,
that's right. Yeah, and we launched it. When we launched it in March, actually, there's a recent Harvard case study on it. So if you want to know more, you can do it. But you can read about it, the audience. But we didn't quite know whether it was going to succeed. There were some challenges, including on Apple platform, the iPhone that doesn't allow it to work so well. But I must say that today we have we just crossed 2.3 million downloads in Singapore. That's over 40% of the population. Probably more than half of the smartphone population with smartphones, working adults. And it's been actually quite well integrated in our contact tracing process. So every time there's someone tests positive for COVID-19, we check whether they are Trace Together user. In fact, majority of them are now. We request that they upload their data, proximity data, that was previously only stored on their phone and not accessible by anybody else. And the Ministry of Health gets a copy of it. They determine who the close contacts are, and they very quickly quarantine the close contacts. So this has really shortened the contact tracing process. I think the other major advantage of it is that it can pick up people that you may not know about. So imagine if you go to a restaurant, the customer next to you, you've been sitting there for maybe 30 minutes or even more, you're in close proximity, but you wouldn't know who they are.
Absolutely.
And the restaurant owners it would be a very tedious process to find that out. But now with technology, with contact trace, with Trace Together, actually that can be done automatically. So I think that has been sort of a big boost. But again, it's just like Australia, we are not out of the woods at all, far from it. We are very much afraid and preparing for possible second, third rounds, just searching cases, imported or otherwise. We need to make sure our testing and tracing capabilities are really up to the mark. Driving up adoption, there are people without smartphones. We had to sort of switch to a hardware dongle as a different sort of tactic. We have to, continue to promote the use of Trace Together, assure people that privacy and security are all taken care of. So still very much work in progress.
Yeah, absolutely. No, but I do commend the efforts being pioneers in contact tracing or amongst the pioneers in contact tracing. I know that Trace Together is not only an app, but there's also a device. Maybe we'll talk a little bit more about that. But I do want to come over here to Yunus and talk about the UAE and Dubai in particular's response. Now, the UAE has taken, Yunus, quite advanced and comprehensive measures. So we see testing at over 50% of the population with 5.2 million individuals tested, and that's amongst the largest rates in the world in terms of testing. We also saw a nationwide sterilization program that made us all feel much better, even as we were on lockdown in our homes, knowing that as we were inside, the streets literally were being cleaned, the public transportation was being sterilized. So a lot of measures there. But in parallel, Dubai in particular, over the last 20 years, has been undergoing a digital transformation journey. And we didn't know back then, as that strategizing was happening and building of the digital infrastructure, that today it would be put under the test in the face of this pandemic. So what would you say, Yunus, are the lessons learned for Dubai from the lockdown, and how is the city utilizing this experience to better prepare for future pandemics or disruptions that might not and hopefully are not necessarily linked to health crises? If you can unmute, that would be great.
Well, then, speaking on behalf of UAE government, I can confidently say that the key lessons we have learned through the pandemic, that it's never too early to prepare for the future. And our 2 decades of investment and technologies and digital infrastructure in the city of Dubai have played a crucial role in this pandemic. And we see that, have had a huge positive impact in the way that the entire country and the city have responded back to this pandemic. That is, more or less, we are going through the same cycles, across it globally. For the UAE government, it's always, people's safety have been the key priority, and how to protecting people from the virus. And due to the agility and to the way that the city and the country and the government is operating, have been able to respond very fast and taking an active measures in terms of fighting back this virus. And every decision and every policy that have been taken, that's been used, with the support of technology, with the support of the digital solutions that were around us. We were measuring the effectiveness of those measures and how it have helped into reducing the spread of the virus, creating the physical distance that has been needed, and how also to direct the resources when it comes to testing, when it comes to creating the physical distance between the people, but more importantly also how to utilize best the health service in a way that can also help reducing the virus. And for that, the UAE have taken a couple of active measures in March, and among early governments that have taken early measures in terms of sending the workforce to work remotely, and thanks to the digital infrastructure that's been laid out, that have supported the government in order to operate and to continue offer its services to its residents as has been 100% digital, and continue the services without any shortages. On the other hand, also as a country, we've been able to send the kids and continue the learning, and that was due to the e-learning capabilities that the city have had. And alhamdulillah, the kids, have had, I would say, a different experience. But this is something that can be also built on for future, and this is one of
the parents, if I may add, Yunus.
Exactly, for the parents, that was good for the parents also to come back into that line. So that was also another thing. But also what we have learned from this pandemic, that also the power of data science have played a key role, not only in combating the pandemic, but also helping and accelerating the economic growth once the cities globally have started to open. In Dubai, we built a dashboard that monitors the spread of the COVID-19 virus throughout the methodology equations that is known as an SEIR. And that model is very well known globally. Many cities have used it, but we also went and tweaked it according to our needs. We wanted to understand how to direct the resources. We wanted to understand what would be the need in terms of the PPEs, the essential care services, the ventilators, the ICUs, and so on. So with utilizing such a powerful tool and also data, we've been able to help the decision makers with live data that can help guiding the decisions that's been needed to take in order to go to the lockdown and to protect the people. This was for the first phase. But for the phases that we needed to open the economy, again, such a tool played an active role in terms of supporting the decision makers, how to gradually open the city, and is actively measuring what are the impact of the open up and how do we prevent a second wave, and would that give us any indications? And for that, we built many scenarios. We were monitoring the situation through different scenarios, and also calculating and also looking if we can possibly have another surge, how it would look like, and what kind of other measures that we need to look at. So those has also been, as a foundational systems that are in place today that are also should any surge be possible, in the future, we should get from it an early warning and early alert on what is happening on the city, and also, start actively working in terms, on measures, on policies that can reduce that. And also, on variety of sectors, we saw, also, it's not only enough to monitor what's happening from health perspective, but also socially, and also looking at the economy is very important. So those are one of the areas that we also in Dubai are leveraging the power of the technology and the digital transformation in order to continue, benefit from it and have this agility that is also give us a unique edge in terms of how do we respond very fast to this pandemic.
Great. So not only kind of hard measures in terms of testing and sterilization, but also decision-making going forward and strategizing that is based on data and data science. And that's where the strength of our tools came into play, and everything that was built really came into play at this point. And so, Yunus, you've elaborated very much on how we're going to use what we've learned in the future and in round two. So I want to go back and pick up that conversation with John, because John, you left us off by saying we're, by no means that we're not done, and looks like round two is upon us. And not only that, but despite lockdown, despite the closing and reopening of economies, even the population, even people are very much worried that there is a round two. So what did Australia learn in terms of resilience from round one that it's going to take with it in facing whatever is coming next? And hopefully we don't have to face another round, but if so, what are the lessons there?
Yeah, sure. Thanks, Sana. It's probably too early. I would definitely not hold ourselves out to be people that could provide solid, unequivocal advice on this. But for our own situation and what we've seen, is I think it's fair to say that we underestimated people's need to work. So for our most vulnerable citizens, for the most disadvantaged people in our society, part of the way that the economy has evolved in the last 10, 15, 20 years in Australia is that these people are often they're not in full-time work. They're paid by the day. They're paid for the hours they work. They're employed on a casual
living day by day, potentially.
That's right. So every day you're sick, you're not getting paid. So if you're feeling a little like you've got a coronavirus symptom, but it's not, maybe you're asymptomatic, or maybe you're just not feeling very well.
You're gonna go.
you have an incentive to go to work and pay and get paid and provide food for your family, pay your rent, pay your bills. And I think perhaps Australia underestimated. We've provided a lot of support, and we have paid, as I said, businesses to keep people employed, but that hasn't trickled down to our most vulnerable workers, and that is basically where our newest cluster is. Our newest clusters are amongst our government-provided housing, people that are working casually, and that's something that I think that's a lesson for the whole world. Is how do you get benefits and how do you incentivize people who aren't going to work, that don't get paid? How are you going to take care of their families, make them feel safe? So that's one thing that I think we've learned too. I mean, I will just reiterate what my colleagues on the panel said is, again, I'm old enough to remember Australia having a very big debate about our national broadband network, 10, 15 years ago, and why were we spending all this money on upgrading, fibre optic cable, and did we really need it? Isn't it just teenagers playing online games in their bedroom? And the case for that now has been made. No one could even imagine managing this pandemic without high quality, high speed internet, which has allowed all of us to homeschool our children. It's allowed us to do telehealth consultations with our doctors.
To work from home.
It's allowed us to pass large medical imaging files over the internet from home. It's allowed us to do things like our e-commerce. And let's not underrate the importance of high quality entertainment. There is a role for Netflix in helping us manage this pandemic. People need to be, if they're going to be in their homes, if they're going to have a smaller life for a period of time, they need tools that help them manage their mental health, that help them manage the other risks that are associated with keeping people in smaller groups. So thank God we had the National Broadband Network. And thank God that Singapore and the UAE also had similar strong digital infrastructure. You can imagine being in a country where homeschooling is not an option because the internet is not good enough, where you can't buy online groceries, where you can't do your work in the way that we are working now via Zoom and WhatsApp and the various other tools that we've all come to rely on. We've also rolled out our own apps, like Singapore, like the UAE. Yeah. Tracing information, that's what people need at the moment. So it's a cliche, Zaina, but you would have heard a lot of people say we've had more innovation in the last 5 months than we might have otherwise had in 5 or 10 years.
Absolutely believe it.
And it's a cliche because there is some truth to it. We are really seeing a lot of things that otherwise would have been slow walked or have taken longer, being accelerated through necessity. And it turns out that a lot of the infrastructure that we have in place for smart cities can be quickly re-engineered or repurposed to help manage pandemics such as this, or to manage, natural emergencies. So when you have that infrastructure in place, when you have smart CCTV, for example, if I might just use a real world example, we are dealing very closely with our biggest private road operator, and they give us the data points for who's on the road and what are they doing. So are they private vehicles? Are they trucking companies? What is happening on Sydney, Melbourne, Brisbane's roads? And we've seen a huge drop in traffic, as you'd expect. Unfortunately, we've seen a huge drop in the use of public transport, 80% in Melbourne at the moment. A big uptake in bikes. So, in Australia, we had a surge in bicycle purchases. So all of a sudden, we've got Sydney, Brisbane and Melbourne rushing forward with pop-up bike lanes. We know people aren't using buses. So governments and state authorities and local councils have to be nimble, use the data that we're getting, which is only possible in the last 10, 15 years, to make policy decisions. Okay, if people are using bikes, let's open bike lanes. If people aren't using public transport, why not? Because they don't trust it. Okay, what can we do? We need to up the sanitisation. We need to lower the fares during off-peak hours. We need to incentivize people to use it, and we need to have a communication strategy that tells them that it's okay. So these are all the, smart cities are so integrated into technology, and when you pull on one thread, another one comes undone. So Australia's had this wide range of smart city initiatives, public transport, how do we get people moving together out of cars? And in a way, if you looked initially at the COVID-19 pandemic, you'd say, what a disaster. People are scared of using public transport, they've lost their jobs, they're locked in. But the challenge for us as governments is, well, what do you do about it?
Yeah.
So you've got to throw money at mental health services. We've had to pour millions of dollars into that. What are we going to do about the people that are locked in terrible family situations at home? Domestic abuse.
We've seen domestic violence pick up in some countries as well. Yeah.
We have to create a service that people can access. And how do they access it when they're potentially in the same home as their abuser? How do we do it in a way that they can contact us anonymously and have open discussions? We are wrestling with all of these problems. And often the answer is technology. So, the future for smart cities is an extremely bright one, I think. We have fast-tracked a lot of infrastructure because first of all, we need the stimulus spend. We need 66,000 jobs in Australia to build $15 billion worth of infrastructure. And instead of it taking 2 to 5 years, we want it signed. We want federal and local approvals done in a year. So we're going to see better cities. And the important thing with better cities is that it's not government-led, right? It's community-led. Right. The community tells us what they want. I'm conscious I've been talking for a while, Zaina, and I'll share with the other panelists, but it's a fascinating topic. And how does this all work together?
Absolutely. And thanks, John, for that, because you really did touch on so many aspects of what makes cities smart. And I really like the word you use, fast track. I really hope that cities and countries fast track building the right foundational elements and infrastructure that smart cities need. And now we can see firsthand why they are so important. All the preaching that people that are in the ecosystem like us have been doing for years, now we can see that firsthand.
Our moment has arrived, yes.
The moment.
And I don't want to undersell how terrible this situation is for a lot of people on this call. I live in Dubai. It's a tough time, and it's a very tough time in Australia. So I don't want to be the Pollyanna. I acknowledge it's a tough time. There are opportunities for smart cities, and I do think it's conversely and a little bit perversely, it's a good time to be talking about what investment do we need for smart cities? How can we make our cities better? How can we improve the quality of life for our citizens?
Right.
And help governments make decisions in their interests.
Right. And I want to touch with now Chihao on the balancing what John has been saying about fast tracking the deployment of these technologies. And we saw actually the world really welcome and be encouraged to use, for example, contact tracing apps that we talked about, but other technologies as well. But with that, almost immediately when we're talking about this fast deployment of technology, the debate around data privacy and individual privacy arises. So Chihao, what do you think is really a balanced approach between, fast tracking deployment, but at the same time maintaining the trust and not jeopardizing people's individual data privacy?
Thanks very much, Zaina. So I'm just going to, for us, I think not just from COVID, but smart nation in general in Singapore, I think trust is one of the most important sort of criteria, prerequisites to transformation, to digitalization. We must put people at the center. So I'll give some examples, in how we have done it. The first thing we are very clear about internally when we do our work is that technology is not the solution. Technology is not the be all and end all, right? Technology is meant to support sort of the work that the health authorities are doing, the national strategy. The digital contact tracing app is not meant to replace the contact tracer. It is meant to help them. So I think that's very important to establish first, is that technology is not the solution. It is there to help humans. Secondly, I think the other aspect that we do is always put the user at the center of everything we do, right? And that's critical. That could mean first making sure that the solutions, the products that we design work, right? They must first work. People want to know that it's helping them. It is not alien. The user interface is friendly. It's something that they can be comfortable and familiar with. But putting users at the center also means that we bear in mind sort of any concerns they may have, security, privacy. That's why we have been very transparent in how we communicate. The data on your Trace Together app stays on your device. It is never leaves the phone and is automatically deleted after 25 days when it's no longer needed for contact tracing. So all these policies are actually made very clear upfront. We have in Singapore, last year we actually had a very high-level committee for public sector data security. So it has reviewed all the data protection measures, and fortunately, I guess in time, we have a strong foundation. We have the recommendations, we have the implementation all in place, and people know that there's a certain assurance. I think the third aspect that in building trust, apologies for that, is about transparency. I think we are making sure that whatever we do along the way, we are telling people. Our ministers are explaining. They are giving a lot of information about what's going on. We decided to open source the Trace Together app like shortly after it was launched. Not because we were ready or that's what we planned for, but we know that actually that was important to get the community to be working together with us, right? And finally, I think in terms of even the Trace Together token, the device that we are now doing, it is something that we have invited industry experts to do a teardown. We intend to run a hackathon at some point, and people know that what's inside. It's not some nefarious device that government is used to track people. But like I said, trust is very important. Putting users at the center, make sure we don't replace the humans. We are transparent in everything we do, and that allows sort of Singapore as a whole to come together. So it's a community response. We call it SG Together, Singapore Together, SG United. And that's been sort of, I think that's important to emphasize. Apologies about drilling. Thank you.
Thanks, Chiao, for that. And that brings me to, when we talk about protecting data, it brings me to protecting also people's lifestyles. And I want to shift here to Yunus. In the UAE, there's a major emphasis on people's happiness and people's lifestyles. How would you say Dubai is going to balance as well between these measures that are being taken, between the technologies that are being deployed, and then protecting also the aspect of happiness and lifestyle, which it's known for, and which people come from all over the world to visit and to live in Dubai and the UAE for this this happiness ambition?
Well, Zainab, let me first, I would say, I would agree with John and Tan, whatever that is happening during this time comes at the focus of one single thing, which is human and people aspect of it. All of what has been placed as an action is to protect the welfare, to protect the happiness of the people, and to serve them in the best way possible. During these times, whether they are at their homes in a lockdown, or they need a social service, or they need any essential service that the city needs to provide to them. And we saw, how the city reacted to it to become, on demand. Everything is really being provided, and thinking of what kind of services needs to be provided over there to these people. So people's happiness is the key priority in every action that the government of UAE have put in its way to fight back these difficult times. And I would say, this also would come, with a lot of aspects that has to do with the resilience, of the city, in terms of how does it really inspect and adapt the changes that's happening and bounce very fast back, towards what has to be provided back to the people. And it depends on which vertical you're talking about, then your reaction is slightly different, but at the end of the day, it's always about the single factor, which is how to serve people best. Technology always have been as a mean, but the ultimate goal is people happiness. We've used the technology and we've used the enablement that are around ourselves in order to become more fast in our response, safe in our response, but also efficient, so that we can move very fast to what's coming next and adapt to the changes that are coming at a higher pace that are in today. And I would say again also in the way that the country have really been able to reform itself around different aspects have showed the ability for the city to provide the best services and the medical sector, and I would say in the education sector, or even when we look at it from economic perspective. So we realize the importance of a greater resilience and the merit for future pandemic. We are also investing more in technology, because it is also a mean for us to look into the future and how these digital enablements is supporting our cities to become more resilient. I think we need to be able also to look at how we would change, and also accept that the life post-COVID is a bit different, and the frequency of change should come at a higher pace, but always with one single focus: how to make our people happy and how to serve them best. It has different definition to different nations, but I think at the end we would all agree making the people happy is at our core values, and as our core responsibility of government in order to take care of our citizens and residents.
Thank you for that great summary, Yunus. I think we've come to the end of our time together. This was meant to be short, but I really do appreciate, and I thank the panelists for being so candid in discussing their nation's experiences, and also being quite precise in outlining the challenges and the success factors as well, the measures, the resilience learnings that we all saw in round one. And I really do hope, and I know that everyone watching as well hopes, that we don't have to face a round two, but if we do, we are going to be much more prepared this time, and hopefully face it much more productively and efficiently. Thank you so much, gentlemen. I do wish you a great remainder of this day. And for our audience, thank you for tuning in. We'll have this session available on our social media channels, our Dubai social media channels. And so you can tune in later there. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Zainab. Thank you to everybody.
Thank you, everybody.
Take care. Goodbye.